Hey guys, and welcome back to the Gunpla Building video series that I'm doing. It's sort of my version of a tutorial kind of series. Once again, basically it's just showing you guys how I go about doing things. A lot of the steps in the Gunpla Building process have a lot of different ways that it can be done, and people do things differently. And I'm just showing you how I go about doing them, especially the steps that we're going to be doing today are also the kind of steps that have a lot of different ways that people can go about doing them. So again, I'll just show you a couple different ways that I use, and yeah, that's about that. So today we're going to basically be implementing the changes that we laid out in the last video that we want to make to help improve the overall look of our kit. That's going to include a couple of very slight modifications, and then mostly just some seam line removal. So let's get to it. Okay, so here's all the parts laid out, and I think the first thing that we're going to do is work on what I mentioned here about on this piece of armor on the back of the arm. Has these three little indents there in it, and I've actually been kind of, in the last video I said that I wanted to drill those out, and I've actually been going on the fence back and forth as to whether I want to actually fill those in with putty or drill them out, and I'm still not sure, but I think we're just gonna go ahead and drill them. Sure, why not? Okay, so first thing, we've got a pin vise here and a couple of drill sizes in this particular set. We've got 3 different size drill bits. This is a pin vise that I like to use. This is a Tamiya brand, I believe. I don't remember. I've had this one for quite a while. But the reason that I like it is that this part on the end just is loose, so that like when you're holding it in your hand, this part can be pressed up against the back of your hand, and then you drill like that. So it's very comfortable. You pull out this part, and here's one of the bits, and it's got 2 different size holes there. You open up the back part, and it's got another one with 2 more different size holes in there, so it's got 4 different options depending on the size of bit that you're going to be using. So let's put that there for now. We need to figure out which one we need. I think we're going to need to go for this middle one, which I believe is 2 millimeters. And you could measure this with a caliper, but or you could just take the end of the drill bit and just kind of fit it in. And I can see this is going to be a little bit small. Let's try the next size up. A little bit small is okay. Better than being too big. So see, the next size up that I have is definitely a little bit too big, so I'm gonna go with that medium one. If you're going to be using a pin vise for stuff, I would also recommend getting a set, just something similar like this that has some very small bits, because they can be very useful for other things like drilling out the Vulcan holes on like Gundam heads and other different small little tiny stuff like that. So recommend that. Anyway, let's see. I think this is going to fit in there. Not really. So I think we need this one. Okay, that's nice and tight. And then before drilling, it's a good idea to just use the end of your knife and just kind of in the center, just make a little notch there just to kind of guide your drill, make sure that your drilling is going to be center. So in the center of where you want to drill, just make a little divot there. It'll be easier for the drill to follow and stay on course. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that for all 3. Like this. So how you guys doing? You doing okay? I'm pretty busy this week at work, but it's okay. A little bit tired, but the weather's getting warm and I went out cycling today. That's good. So I've got those little divots there to guide the drill, so then I can just go ahead and just drill this. Don't have to press super hard. You have to press a little bit just to give it some force, and then once you start to get through, you'll feel a little bit of pressure before finally breaking through. You can see I am all the way through on that now. So I'm just going to continue drilling a little bit just to make sure the hole is nice and clean, and then I'll continue drilling as I'm backing it out, again just to make sure that the hole is as clean as possible. So there we go. I can see I did miss a little bit because this is a little bit smaller than the actual hole. There is a little bit still on there, but we'll get to that in a minute. That'll be okay. So then we'll do the other two. That's that. Now, just to clean those up a little bit, I do have a circular file. Now it's a little bit large for this size, but it should work a little bit. So I can basically just take it and pressing especially on the side that I want to even out. So as you can see, I'm just filing just a little bit because files are very effective. So if you're not careful, you'll easily file much more than you want. It's still not quite right. Alright, so that's drilled out and cleaned out for both of the arms. That's what it ends up looking like. You can see some of the frame underneath. That's one thing that I actually didn't talk about in the review of this kit, but this kit has essentially, basically, like kind of a almost full inner frame. If I take this apart here, I think this slides off like that. This one can go here. Take off that and that, and not only on the arm. I mean, it looks the best on the arm. The legs sort of have it as well. And what I mean by an inner frame is that basically it can stand as a model without the armor pieces on. So where are we? Something like that. So without the armor on the arm, it does have all of this. So that's pretty awesome. Just another reason to love this kit. So yeah, that part's done. Let's see, the next thing that I think I want to do is here. This is something I actually didn't talk about in the last video because I just recently noticed it. These thrusters on the side skirt armor, are connected. If I can take them out. There are two thrusters, but they're connected there in the center. But you can see each one does have its own individual plug, so they don't really need to be connected for anything. So we're just going to unconnect them because I don't want to have that piece showing there in the center. So I think we're going to do like that. And there you can see on this side, it's got that connection piece in the middle and it just doesn't really look quite right. So we'll just cut those and clean up those nubs here. Hang on just a minute. Okay, so those are separated and looking better, I must say. Another problem that I've noticed that this kit has is that the front and back part of the basic waist section there tends to come apart very easily like this, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and glue that. So the first thing I want to do just to make it easier on myself is take off the skirt armor. So we'll take that off. I do want to leave the poly caps in there as well. I mean, I do want to leave the polycaps in there though, however, as well was not the right word. Anyway, the polycaps are necessary in there, so we do want to keep those in. But these, oops, it's okay. So basically I've just got the front and back part of the skirt armor. I'll just put a little glue on there. Just like we did with the knife, I'm just going to use this Tamiya extra thin cement. Just a little bit of glue on that peg. And then a little bit of glue in this hole. The top two holes, because the bottom hole of the 3 holes there is actually for the polycap, and although it's not a polycap that moves at all, we just don't really need any glue there. So we'll just go ahead and press that. And then before I put the skirt armor back on, I'll just make sure that that's good and dry, but then that should keep this part from coming apart anymore. Alright, now let's take a look at the legs, just to give you guys an idea of the inner frame that I was talking about. This is basically what I mean. It's just the lower half of the leg that's connecting the thigh, which doesn't have anything inside, to the foot here. But anyway, it's of course not a full inner frame, but it's still pretty cool. I've just taken off the side armor pieces here because we've got a little bit of work to do on those. I don't need the feet right now, so we can just put those off to the side in the box. This seam line on the side of the thighs, we're going to want to get rid of that. So this piece just attaches onto the top. There's a polycap in there. I went ahead and took that out for the time being. And I just want to pull these off. Now, if we get rid of that seam line while this is attached, that means, you can look at this one, that means when we paint this, we're going to have to mask off this joint section here, which is not terribly difficult, but it just makes our life a little bit harder. And there's one pretty easy modification that we can do where we can just altogether avoid that headache. I'll show you that here in just a second. Let's go ahead and put these armor pieces back on here, like that for the time being. Now, this has these pegs here on the top which hold the thigh armor on there, and what we're going to do is simply cut them off. So we'll take our cutters here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. Now you're thinking, well, maybe anyone who's maybe more experienced is probably not surprised at all, but some of the less experienced might be thinking, oh my god. Anyway, don't worry, we'll be perfectly fine. And actually, cutting stuff off of a kit that's not supposed to be really cut off is a very gratifying experience, so I definitely recommend it. So now we've got our thigh armor here. It should be connected on top of that, but we're just going to connect it. Don't forget your polycaps. It's very important. Do not forget your polycaps and which way it is supposed to be orientated. So now here's our thigh piece, and once again this part that does go on the top, we don't need that right now. So basically what we're going to do is just get rid of this seam line, and then when it's all finished and painted, when we're ready to put the kit together, we can paint this part separately, and then we can just slide that on. If I can. Sorry, one bit that I missed that is going to complicate this a little bit is that there's this piece going around which stops us from being able to slide that part on. But if we look at the other leg, you can see that that piece is really not visible up inside of there, so we can get away with just cutting that as well. So I don't want to cut too much if we can avoid it, so I'm just going to cut a little bit off the sides here. Because looking at this one, I can see the only area that we really see of that part is at the top. When the leg is bent there, we can just see the top of it there inside. So I'm going to try to see if we can just get away with just cutting the sides of this a little bit. Like that. Let's see if we can slide that on. Still not yet. We're going to have to cut more. I think we're going to have to go ahead and cut all of this as much as we can. Okay, so we can make that a little bit prettier later, but it's at least cut and it should be out of the way. There we go. Now we can slide that part on, and it doesn't look as pretty in there without, I mean, it's really not a whole lot of difference and nothing that probably anyone's ever going to notice, but once we clean that up, it should look perfectly fine. So yeah, after we've got rid of the seam line, we can just, and done all the painting and everything, we can just slide that onto there with some glue, and then it'll be all attached. Now, you may be thinking, what about this bottom section? Do we have to do the same thing? Well, as you saw, it's just one big piece inside of there, so there's not really any way. I guess, yeah, it could kind of be a way, but it's definitely not going to be as easy. We could cut these pegs here on the side and then just sort of do something similar where we just slide this down into there, but because of the shape of it, it's not something that will just slide straight in. Like the top part is just this rectangular piece, so that's pretty easy, but this is just not something, and then plus this edge around the top, it's not going to fit through there. It's just going to be much more difficult. So we are just going to have to mask that, but it is going to be a pretty easy thing to mask because this part inside of there, we're probably just going to have to hand paint that anyway. So I'm just, whenever we go to paint it, I can just wrap some tape just around this joint part, and then, you know, we can spray our paint around here and then we'll be fine. And then we want to paint this joint part, we just cover with tape the armor and then just spray the joint, and that's it. So it shouldn't be too hard. So let's get rid of these seam lines. Let's do the lower part of the leg first, and this one on the front, when the parts are totally pressed together, the seam line is barely visible, so that one I know should be very easy to get rid of. This one on the back is one that's kind of supposed to be there. It's a very thick seam, so we're gonna have to do a little bit more on that. But first, let's just talk for a moment about putty, because we are going to need some putty. And so let's look at the different kinds of putty. This is the first one, is something that basically this is what I've been using almost exclusively for the whole time that I've been using putty. This is Tamiya polyester putty, and it's actually a two-part putty. It is used for remodeling, detail fabrication, sculpturing, I think that should be sculpting, repairs, kit modifications, easy to use, 120 grams. This is a larger bottle. The normal size bottle, it does come in this smaller size like you'll see in a minute. This is just a larger one. Like I said, this is a two-part putty, so I'll show you a little bit more how to use it in a little bit, but basically you have to mix these two parts in order to make it into the putty, which will become hard and what you need to use. So we'll get back to that here in a bit. The other kind is just Tamiya basic type putty, which looks like this, which I think is going to be much more useful for us at this time for just getting rid of seam lines. I actually just started using this, so this one I have less experience with, but I think it will be much more useful for me in the future. I basically just didn't really know of its existence until just recently, so that was kind of the problem. I basically was using this because I thought that it was just, I don't know, the best thing for me, but mixing those can be a little bit annoying. So this is just comes straight out of the tube, you don't have to mix anything, and so it just makes your life a little bit easier. And then I do also have this third kind, which is Tamiya light curing putty, and this is basically similar to the basic type putty, but this cures much more quickly. Cures just meaning that it hardens much more quickly because it reacts to light. Now it reacts best to actual like sun, natural light, but because I usually do my building and working in the evening or at night, I really haven't used this one a whole lot. I've used it a couple times, and from my experience it is not quite as strong as this one, but I think if you're just using it for like just very thin like seam lines that you need to fill in, this will probably do fine. But yeah, like I said, I just really haven't used it a whole lot because I'm usually not working when it's light, and I don't have a lot of natural light coming into this room anyway, so I'd have to like take the part outside or something anyway. But there is that. I'm probably not going to talk too much more about that, but just know that it exists anyway. So to prepare the part for getting rid of the seam line, we need to take this apart. Once again, I'm just being careful not to break any pegs unnecessarily. And the surface that's going to be surface where we're going to get rid of the seam line here on the front, and then here this part on the back, where those two areas are going to meet and be fused, we just want to make sure that they're fused very well. So right now it's just this soft, not soft, but at least smooth plastic. So what we want to do is just sort of rough that edge a little bit, just so that the bonding agent has more like to grip to. So you can use a few different things. You can use a file, just a flat file, works pretty well. You could also just go back to using your sanding stick, which also works. I usually just use a file because it's really quick. You only have to just take a second. So this back area, we're just going to file that just a little bit, not a lot, because you don't want to take away plastic. You just kind of want to make the plastic there a little bit rough. So just a little bit there, that's enough. And then this one has, this one was the female side, so it's very flat. But this one has the pegs, so you just kind of have to go around the pegs a little bit. Just like that. Okay, that's enough. So, just like we did with the knife, we want to make sure to put this in, because we want that to be inside. We're going to take our glue, and we're going to put a little bit on this side, or on the front and the back. Sorry, I hope that you can see that, and I hope it's in focus for you guys. I'm focused on what I'm doing, and I hope the camera is focused on what I'm doing as well. Just putting some glue along the edge there. Don't worry if you get glue where you don't want it, because there'll be plenty of time to clean that up later. So we've got some glue on there. Just go ahead and press it together very firmly, and if you get some glue coming out, that's perfectly fine. So just going to go ahead and press that. And then on this back one is too thick. I know we're going to definitely need some putty there, so I won't worry about it. But on this front part, I don't think we're going to need any putty. So I'm just going to put some extra glue as well on the outside. Just sort of brushing it on that edge. Just this glue is very thin, so this glue is not going to fill any cracks. If you have like some really large cracks between the parts, this glue is not going to do anything to fill those. You need to either use thicker glue, which is not really recommended, or just use putty. So, but I think for this front part, just that glue should be enough. So we'll let that dry. Now for the back, let's take a look. This is a pretty thick line, so we're going to need some putty in here. And why don't we, I think for most everything else we're just going to use the basic type, But just to show you at least how to use it, I'll just use the this polyester putty for this back part, just to at least show you guys how to use it. So give me a minute to repeat that process for this leg, so then when I use the putty we can use it for both legs at once. So hang on just a minute. Okay, so for using this putty I'm just using one of these just kind of small metal trays that you can get pretty much anywhere, and they're pretty cheap. As you can see, this one's got plenty of putty residue in there from just being used before. Basically you're just going to want to put in some of this main putty from this tube first, as much as you're going to need. We're really not going to need a whole lot, so I'll just go ahead and put some in here. Let's see, something like that I think should be enough for just doing this stuff on the legs. A little bit more just to be safe. If we have extra, we can use it somewhere else, and I'll just use a toothpick here, kind of cut that off. As you can see, it's kind of a grayish color. Yeah, like that grayish white color. And we're going to take this small bottle, and what this has in it is like a very dark orange color. And basically what you want to do is add just a little bit of this, and then when you mix it together you want it to basically become this color. So when it matches this light yellow color, that's the right mix of this small one and this one. So you might not get it your first time and you might have to add a little bit more or less, something like that, but my advice is just use a little tiny bit of this. It doesn't take a lot to color that, so just use a little bit, and then if you need more you can always add more. So I'll use the end of this toothpick here, and there we're just gonna take a little bit. I think something like that is all that we're gonna need probably here. I'll just take a little bit more. That should be more than enough. So cap that back up, and then just go ahead and mix that, and you'll see the color will change as that mixes together, just like paint. Okay, now that's mixed pretty well, and as you can see it pretty much matches the color there, so that's what we want. So it's good to go. And again, as the bottle says, this is basically more for like adding, like sculpting or remodeling. Basically, like say for example you wanted to make this skirt armor like more square instead of round, you could just put some putty on there and wait for it to dry and then file it to like a square shape, something like that. That's basically more like what this putty is for, but you can use it for filling stuff as well, of course. So basically what we want to do is I'll just go ahead and just using the toothpick. I also just got a small little piece of plop light here that I use for spreading it evenly. So basically, if you do any painting and you have like a palette knife, just anything, something similar like that, like a palette knife or something will work as well. But I just want to take a little putty, and it's okay if it's messy, we're just going to be sanding it down later. So I just want to make sure that the important part is that it's filling in that hole. So just make sure, and be a little bit generous, leaving a little bit extra on top, because like I said, we're just going to be sanding it down, so it doesn't matter if there's some extra. You don't want to sand it down to then find that it's actually still recessed in there. Then you're going to have to go in and put in more putty again. So we'll just put that on there. That's pretty good all the way to both ends, and there we go. That's going to be good enough for now. I'm just going to go ahead and do that for the other leg as well, and then we're going to do it on the sides of these legs as well, so hang on just a minute. Alright, so the putty's on both of those, and I went ahead and put some glue on these parts as well, just to make sure the bond is nice and strong. And I'm gonna go ahead and put some putty on there as well. I made plenty of putty, mixed quite a lot of it, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use this on these parts as well. Just gonna go ahead and put some of this on this seam. Again, plenty generously. And one more thing that is important to keep in mind when you're working with putty is that it does have a very strong smell, which is not really good for you, of course, like with many chemical-based things. So just make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area, have a window open, or even wear a mask if you want to be really safe about it. Just try not to breathe it in for too long, too much. It's just not good for you. And since I've got plenty of putty left over, I'll go ahead and use it on some of these other parts as well, where we're going to be filling in. As I mentioned before, we're going to want to fill in this crest that's kind of engraved. Engraved doesn't really seem like the right word, but whatever. Onto the front here, but like I said, I want to keep these the ring around the outside of there, and that's pretty close to each other. So just to make sure I don't get any putty where I don't want the putty, I'm going to use some tape. So where is my tape? Here it is. This is just some basic Tamiya masking tape. I've got, it comes in a few different sizes, and I've got a larger one and a smaller one for different things. I think I'm just gonna go with using some of this large one, and I'm just gonna cover up the area that where I don't want any putty to go. So I think just to be a little bit more economical with this, I'm gonna separate that and just cover the line without covering the insignia. Okay, and that just about does it. We're covered where we need to be covered, and this part we want to fill in, so we'll once again just put some putty on there. And putty, this putty and the other Tamiya basic type putty, guys, takes about 24 hours to cure properly. You could even leave it a little bit longer than that if you want. I've sometimes let it cure for 36 or 48 hours. If I've got nothing to do, or if I'm like busy with something else, you might as well just let it stay on there and cure for a little bit more. It's not gonna hurt. So I've got that pretty well filled in, I think. Just kind of going over it again, make sure that it's pressed into those areas and not just covering the area of the shield over the top of there. Put that aside, add it to our collection. And then next to the mask, like I said, I want to fill in those areas where there's the bird eye. I just want to get rid of that. And do we want to fill in the front little triangle bit? No, we'll go ahead and leave that. So, okay, let's just take off our mask. We'll get this on an alligator clip as well. Where can we attach it? Here. And just a little bit of putty in there. Anything to make it look a little bit less bird-like is good. I mean, I like the shape of the mask just like that. It doesn't really look too bird-like for me, but I can do without the eyes, so just get rid of that. Let's see, there is a seam on the backpack that I forgot to point out in the planning video. So basically, if we take off the thruster parts, 1, 2, and then the one on the top as well, which doesn't really matter, you could just leave that on, but just take it off for now. And then the backpack is basically just two pieces sandwiched together, so there's a seam line going around the side and across the top and here that we want to get rid of that. So the sides should be okay with just glue because they're pretty smooth already. The top, I think we might need to use a little bit of putty in there, so why don't I glue it first, and then actually, now I feel kind of dumb as I'm pulling it apart. The reason that that's so smooth is because it's not a seam line, that is just a mold line, so I feel kind of dumb now. Here is the seam line, it actually goes around the side and then up across the top, so that actually should make our life a little bit easier anyway. Alright, now before I can know if we need to put any putty around here on this, I've got the glue on, but we need to let the glue dry first, so I'll just go ahead and put that aside for the moment. And we're going to take a look at the last part that's going to need some seam lines removed, which would be the rifle. I've gone ahead and taken off all the parts that are not involved in this being sandwiched together. Now what we want to do first is just separate this and sand the insides, just the same like we did before. When it comes to separating parts, there are special tools for it. What I usually tend to use is like my knife blade, like you're seeing me doing now. But there is a chance of you, not a chance, there is a very likely possibility that you'll do a little bit of damage to the kit. But because we're going to be fixing up the seam lines anyway, I'm not really too worried about damaging those areas right now. Another thing that you could use, let's see, I've got it somewhere around here. Another thing that you can use is this, which is just a stir stick for painting, for stirring and mixing your paints. But this flat end here works pretty well if you can get it in between the parts and just kind of turn it a little bit, just to wedge those parts apart. Like that. Works pretty well. Someone's calling me, hang on. Okay, so now the gun is all glued as well, and we need to let that dry for a little while. And while we're doing that, I think we can go back to our kits here and sand this a little bit just to see if we're going to need any putty there on the front. I think the glue was enough, but just to be sure, why don't we take some sandpaper and let's see, probably don't need anything too rough in terms of sandpaper, so I'm going to grab, here's some 800 grit sandpaper, should be pretty good. Can just tear off a piece. A sanding stick would not work very well here because of the nature of the curved surface. So we'll just take a little bit of sandpaper here. And I can see already by the fact that I can still see a line there, that means that there's still a bit of a gap. So just to be on the safe side, and because we've got extra putty that I'm mistakenly getting on my fingers from this, just be patient, guys. Don't be like me, like I'm trying to do this too quickly because I'm doing it for the review or for the video. But be patient, be careful. Just to be on the safe side, we're just going to go ahead and just put some putty on that as well. I've got plenty of putty mixed here that we don't want to let go to waste, so we'll just go ahead and put some on there. It's not a big deal to have to sand that off, so just go ahead and do that here on both sides. Really overestimated how much putty I was going to need. Oh well. Okay, well I think I am going to need a little bit of putty here on the backpack as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on there, and then I'll probably need it in a few areas on the rifle as well. So I'll go ahead and put it on those areas as well. And then we need to let this dry, so I think I'm basically just going to wrap the video up here. Because at this point, basically that stuff's putty. You guys get the idea. You don't need to see me do it anymore, but I'll put some more on these areas. And then we need to let it cure for at least 24 hours. And then we'll come back in the next video and show about how to just sand that, clean that up, and then we'll be ready to prime. So yeah. Alright, so that's it for today's episode. I hope that was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, comments, or advice, any kind of stuff like that, leave that below. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video where we're going to prime the kit. It's ready to be primed, and then we can start painting and everything else after that. So I'll see you guys soon.